Okay, so I made some drawings based on what people shared in the Slack channel.
Okay.
Most of the use cases people shared were on the level of, yes, we use multiple systems. So it wasn't that exciting, or we need multiple systems. So I made this small presentation with a small agenda. Goal of this meeting would be to basically get a set of requirements we need to design against. And it starts with some base rules we all have to accept. And then we can actually look at the scope. If the diagrams I have drawn, if they cover everything, or where we're still missing some parts. When I made the diagrams, I also came up with some other interesting questions to see if they are in scope or not, and if we should design against those problems. Does anyone have any additions to the agenda?
Maybe it will naturally go that way, but maybe it's also interesting to look back at why the architecture decision of the current implementation was made, so we can learn from that. But that might just be part of the conversation.
Yeah. A small spoiler: minimal viable product, I guess.
Okay, that's perfectly reasonable.
Okay, so I set up a few base rules. Private keys stay with the node. So that's one of the design principles we had from the beginning. We're not going to copy any private keys. Anybody that has the option to download one and to do anything with it will promote any insecure configuration. Also, a bit of more of a concept, an abstract thing is that every node has a wallet, and that's where verifiable credentials should live. This also means that there might be an upcoming change this year about how verifiable credentials are distributed. And access to data is given when the request has verifiable credentials in it and it has a proof of ownership attached to it, typically a cryptographic signature. Jorrit, welcome. We're doing this in English.
Oh my God.
Yes, just for you.
Good luck.
There's some quotes that have also that came from the crypto coin world and some good practice with private keys. Keys at the edge promotes that you should store the private keys where they belong and not in a central place. And the other one is from the cryptocurrency movement, which they say no keys, no coins. So, for example, if you're using a platform who sells and buys crypto coins for you, you do not own them. They own them for you. So if they go bankrupt or they steal stuff, then it's gone. So these are 5 base rules. Does anybody disagree with these? Or maybe has an additional one? No. Okay. So this basically also promotes the decentralized architecture. Okay. Maybe you already looked at the diagrams in the sidebar. Okay, so the basic concept for what we need, it's not what we currently have. What we need is that there's one organization and it has data, medical data. And there's another organization that wants to view this data or use this data for a certain use case. And basically, we want that the organization displayed on the left here authorizes the other organization based on some legal basis to be able to fetch data. So this does not say that a single node has to authorize another single node. So this is basically on the conceptual level. Given also the concept that whoever owns the NUTS node has signed a contract with the legal entity being the healthcare organization. So that's why you see multiple nodes here with a single organization. Any questions on this part? Okay, cool. And when the other organization is authorized, then that organization, or actually the users working for that organization, should be able to access data from the other organization, regardless what system they are using. Is it electronic health records or planning application, medical, medicine, whatever, doesn't matter or should not matter.
Does this include the scenario that you just want to see your own data at multiple places?
That will be slide 7.
Okay.
That's basically what currently in one of the RFCs is already noted, is that you can use the authorization, the access tokens to access data from your own organization.
Okay.
So it's only a single line, but it implies that if you're a healthcare organization and you have multiple vendors, you can also use NUTS for those multiple vendors to access their own APIs instead of cross-nodes.
Okay, so the API different nodes will be accessible via one access token, regardless of where you get
So
it.
you could also use this specification to get rid of all the other custom security.
Okay. Cool. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, access data, this conceptual level. And if you look closer to one level deeper, what the NUTS nodes will be doing or should be doing is that you have some sort of application running at the data organization that decides that another organization should be authorized, right? So that's the arrow going in. Something is saying, okay, this is authorized, whatever the legal basis is. So if it's an e-transfer, nursing transfer, then it comes from the process, but there's a system that says, yes, now this other organization is authorized. Could also be explicit consent from the patient itself, but also a system has to register that it's a trigger, and then authorization is the result. And in this case, I've drawn it here at a single node. So this is already a question. Should whatever application is authorizing this, should it only do it at a single node? Or maybe even multiple nodes? So I think that's a question. I think if you look at security implications, you probably want it like this and not all the nodes within the same legal entity. But that's something that we can discuss further in the next session. The result should be that all other applications within the viewer organization know that they are authorized to view data. And currently this is done by sending authorization credentials to all the other NUTS nodes. This is also required because in the base rules, we said something like every node has a wallet and that's where your credential lives. Which means that every single node has to receive the credential, or a trigger that a credential is available, or a trigger that they can request a credential, or all three of them. So something should happen there. First question for you. Should this be use case specific or not?
What do you mean by use case specific? Can you give an example?
Yeah, so we have two nodes on the right here for this care organization. Top one is, for example, Baby Connect use case. Bottom one is e-overdracht use case. So when an authorization is created here for e-overdracht, should both of these nodes get a trigger, or just the one that actually supports that use case?
It might be a bit more in line with the other Workgroup that were also setting up for the consents, of course, but doesn't it depend on the level of the permission that is or the grondslag voor de uitlevering, the legal base in which that is specified. So if the permission given for all data to be shared, then you could already create authorization credentials for all those use cases in the future, but you could also only request that the organization could initiate the request from their end if they want to use it, and check if the authorized viewer is valid and broad enough to handle that.
And then your connection is not great, so that your microphone.
It sounds like you're switching your microphone or something.
Yeah, but they're wireless. I'm guessing it's not a.
It should be fine. Is it okay now or is it still?
No.
Just,
No, not better.
no?
Same.
What is this?
Maybe you used your laptop's mic instead of the mic of the AirPods or something.
Yeah, I can see. Oh,
Yeah, I think you're using the microphone from your telephone, because it sounds like
It's ridiculous. Yeah.
we're listening
Okay.
to your phone. Not.
Yeah. Sorry for that. Now she
switched.
switched. That was strange. It was selecting.
And now there's an echo.
does it help? Okay, back to the AirPods. Okay, are we
Yes.
there now?
Yes, this is better. Could you repeat the question, please?
Yes, and sorry for wasting your guys' time. So we split it up into two parts. This process. So of course you authorize at the moment where you have quite. Let's use example if you have a broad permission. So you authorize for all kinds of use cases in the future. Doesn't necessarily mean that at the moment that that consent is registered, that then all of the authorizations need to be sent to the viewer organization. It could also be that the viewer organization initiates or asks at a later moment when they would want to access certain viewer data, if that original consent is still valid. I think that's a more realistic scenario, because we're also now in the early stages of nuts. So there's going to be continuously organizations coming in, viewers being activated. So at the moment when the consent is registered, it might, or a legal basis registered, it might not be, of course, broad enough, or even if you send it at that moment, it might not apply yet to everything. It will happen in the future.
Yes, this is true, but then you're depending on whatever the viewer is going to do. But do you want to block certain nodes from the data organization point of view?
Do you want to block nodes from the data?
Because you're right. And there's also, of course, the specific applications that can process specific data are also
Yeah.
organized on the viewer part, right? So even if you're, for example, say, okay, here's an authorization credential that you can use for the e-overdracht, and it is received in a node that can only do Baby Connect, then all the applications attached to that node cannot use it because they don't have any logic to view the data. But that,
Yeah.
of course, it's limiting data to be viewed to users, but it doesn't block anything security-wise.
Yeah. I think from data minimalization kind of point of view, it's always I think better to only push an authorization credential to a party that you know that can do something with it. I mean, there's a base N in there. So if we, I'm not sure how difficult it is to filter it out, but if it's not too difficult, I would really prefer to filter it.
Well,
to
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think we're now talking less about the problem of the organizations or the multiple vendors, more of the scope of authorization credentials and when they're used. And I agree with you guys that I think authorization credentials should be more kind of access token like, that they should only be there if they can be used. But that doesn't mean that something is also in the consent, the legal base cannot be at a later moment called upon to see if an authorization credential then can be created at a later moment.
Yes, I think you're both right. But later on, when we're going to design it, then we can go back to this requirement and say, okay, does this help? Or do we actively have to say, we're not going to support this requirement because implementing will become too expensive? Right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm not sure we can definitively answer it yet, but this is a good variable to keep in mind.
Because if this later on is just a nice to have, then might be different.
Yeah. But you use the DID documents, right, to in this phase, and the services are all published in the DID document, so you know which services are supported quite easily.
Yes, but if you look closely at the purpose of use used in authorization credential, it's not that it should be one-on-one comparable with a service type. There's no requirement for that yet. Of course, we can add that, but if you think this is required, it either has to be specified in each use case, or we have to get some kind of table mapping thing going on, right?
Okay, I thought it was some kind of a one-on-one thing.
No. Currently we use it that way because it keeps stuff simple. But for example, you could argue that if there's specific consent from a patient that the GP may access any kind of data, you can use it in the Baby Connect use case, but that authorization credential will probably not say something specific about Baby Connect.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I didn't also realize that you guys had already thought of authorization credentials being broader applicable than just for a very specific use case and a very specific node. But again, I think it might be more for that other work session where we dive into authorization credential.
Yeah. So, but either way, we should keep in mind that we have to look at use cases that we are not going to share credentials with the entire world or the entire other organization, all the systems that live there, because it could be really simplistic systems only doing a very private and medical information non-specific thing. but it's still receiving credential. Legally, it's about data minimalization. So, and in that way, you can always argue that the viewer has to have this data.
Yeah.
And the other side is also a security issue. So, for example, the viewer organization has 2 nuts nodes here. So maybe the top one has been super secured because it's a really large vendor and has all the security measures enabled. And maybe the bottom one is just for supporting 10 clients in care, really simple use case, small organization, startup, and has less security. Should it then also receive all those authorization credentials that it should not use?
Yeah, well, I think we're all for the data minimization here. It shouldn't be distributed if it's not used or needed.
Okay, I'll note it. So enough typos. That's it. Okay. So that was an important question for this diagram. Not just synchronize everything, push everything to nodes that are in the legal context, but also think about maybe that node doesn't have to receive it, the other one what does, etc., etc. And if this is actively pushing the credential to the other node or creating a trigger so the node can retrieve it, that's out of scope. That's actually the design phase. I think that's the next section, which one of the 2 can help in simplifying. Okay, so when there are authorization credentials, so this was this view line on the left here means that regardless of authorization credentials, you can access data from within your own organization.
About this is not exactly the result of the slide 6, right?
No,
This is just another use case.
yeah. So this will be the result of slide 6.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Then I have a question because then we need to sync the authorization credentials from the nodes within the data organization.
That's technical details.
Okay, but that's the general idea. This would be beautiful if this would work, because then we can phase out a lot of expensive enterprise service bus solutions.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, so in general, I think, yeah, this is what we want, without any additional lines between nodes that credentials have to be copied from wallet to wallet and all that kind of nastiness. Okay, any comments? Right. Okay. 6 and 7 were about like the status quo, right? So there are a lot of DID documents, and you know organization names, and the entire network is stable, nothing changes. And that's the easy part. Because the hard part is, okay, so you issued credentials, or you have an authorization, an active authorization, which started maybe 3 months ago. And now a new piece of software with its own nuts node is also activated for that organization. This is, by the way, the same use case for if you're going to do use case specific authorizations. This is also the case then that a certain node now offers that specific service for this organization. Right, so the node in the middle, it has lived for 2 years, but now suddenly it also supports a overdraft or baby connect or whatever. So additional services. because then the node itself has to make a decision. There's no outside trigger. There's no user or no process in an application at the data organization side that says we need to issue credentials. Something happens in a network, and based on whatever administration you have, this node should be authorized.
Mhm.
And at the same time, if a vendor stops supporting a specific process for whatever reason. Okay.
Yeah, so
Sure.
yes, that most of the time with these kind of distributed systems, you have the status quo, you have a trigger, and then within the trigger and the current state of the entire network and all the parties that have joined, you're going to do stuff, right? Then the next step is, okay, but what happens if somebody joins and also wants to use these authorizations? Because the organization here said, okay, this is also a vendor of mine, and they provide a piece of software, and we want to use it. You see, this case is always happening if an organization buys a new piece of software and leaves the other piece of software. Right, so there's always a migration step, and if nodes would deal with it automatically, that of course would be awesome. Okay, and the hardest part would then be like deauthorizing, right? So how do you know something stops? And I may have to add a note here. Is the node that is going away actively saying to everybody that it's going away or not? Or does it just expire? Who is going to clean up their administration, or who is just going to leave it alone? You see that happening, right? So the official way to say that you're no longer using a DID document is to deactivate it. But I guess the most common way currently is just to throw away the private keys and don't do anything with it anymore, instead of nicely deactivating it. And the same, of course, is if, for example, an organization credential is the result of somebody of the board of directors of the care organization saying, I'm using this piece of software, is that same person also going to say, I no longer use this piece of software? Tidying up.
Yeah. Authorization credentials themselves also have expiry added to them, don't they? Or well, they don't currently have it, but the purpose of use might specify it. Like
so that's also one of the things we're thinking about adding to the RFCs is basically saying whatever the credential is, it cannot be valid more than 1 year.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I think in general we should go ahead.
Okay. Because okay. Edwin, you first, then Valerie.
I was going to say that like the zorgtoepassingsprofielen that we have with zorgaangebod, we should also probably make those a bit more machine readable. Because currently there's the spec that's documented somewhere. We're also like we in text say what the expiry date is of that authorization credential, but it would be much neater if it was actually properties of authorization credential.
I don't know if I understand, because every credential can have a start and end date.
Okay, I'm quite sure when we looked last time into it with you that expiry date was not necessarily a part of the authorization credential spec.
Yeah,
Or
you
just
mean
one.
you mean that the access policy in which we set the rules for filling a specific filling and interpreting specific fields of the authorization credentials, those access policy could be more machine readable, maybe, because we foresee that there will be an explosion of use cases, explosion of purpose of uses, explosion of access policies. And then it would be nice if it's not Google Doc, but some YAML or something.
Just to make it clear, the expiry date of a verifiable credential is in the verifiable credential specification. So it's in the let's say the root specification. So checking if a credential is valid at the nuts node will check the signature, but it will also check the expiry date, and it will also check if the issuer hasn't been deactivated. Stuff
Okay.
like that. So that's
just
the root.
VC spec.
Yeah. Valerie?
So yeah, a question about this check actually. So so the nuts node that we are trying to access will check itself whenever the node which is trying to access it is active, or because yeah, I didn't get this process of deactivation of the node. So
Yeah.
from my perspective,
basically,
it sounds. Oh, sorry. I just will finish the thought. So, from my perspective, it sounded just like the node is deactivated, but still, if you have the verifiable credential, which is not, which is still active, you can actually, well, access any data and actually, exploit the nuts node. So yeah, I just
in the case here, if this one, right? So this one issued credentials.
Mm-hmm.
And in this case, if it would have been deactivated,
mm-hmm.
and it published an update to the DoD document, then all those credentials are no longer usable.
Mm-hmm.
But
Okay.
if this node has, and the owner of the node and the organization's DoD documents in there, if they have not been deactivated, they have just been left alone,
mm-hmm.
then they're still valid.
Mm-hmm.
This also places requirements on, of course, this process and this arrow going in here.
Yeah.
Because this most likely, this part here, so the combination of this and this is for a specific use case responsible for your authorization administration.
Mm-hmm.
So there's another application here that triggers this. So if you're saying goodbye to this node, then you're probably also saying goodbye to the application there, or you're going to reroute it there. But you have to think about all the authorizations that are still active.
Mm-hmm. And what if the node which tries to access data is deactivated? I mean the node on the right side. So it is deactivated, but someone by, I don't know, using the API or something, using the authorization credentials that are issued for this deactivated node, is trying to access data. How the status of the node is checked? I mean the node which,
So a deactivated DID document no longer contains any key material.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're going to use a credential over this line, you cannot confirm to this part, because you can no longer put a signature on it. And even if you put a signature on this proof of ownership, the other node cannot check it because the DID document is empty. Because it has been used. So key material is gone, so you can no longer prove that you own a credential.
Okay. Now I got it. Thank you. Yeah.
So having a credential in your wallet doesn't mean you can use it, but a credential could also contain private information. So you don't want everybody to have that credential. Only the node that should have it. Okay, so there's deactivation, right? So, and there's no outside trigger. So something has to solve this case, which makes it a bit more complex. Even if, because people will or will not, or people, I will say vendors will or will not have their administration of DoD documents up to date. Okay. Yeah, so this was the other case. So what if this one goes away?
Yeah, which is also interesting because that one can't revoke the authorization credential anymore. So so you can't, so we'd have to check whether the issuer is still active.
Yeah, so this case could also be that the somewhat blurred node has lost its private keys. So it can no longer revoke anything that's still out there.
Yeah, and what level is this known by involved parties? Like, we're building something new, but now the data living in any of the vendors, well, the data in any of the care organizations systems which are provided by the vendors is as safe as the least safe system of a vendor, if that makes sense. It is like the weakest link that determines the security of the viewer being able to access the data of the care organization at any system of the data organization.
Yeah, so basically that is this question, right?
Yeah. Because from a technical point of view, we could say, okay, that's, yeah, it's all Hutch nodes, and there's a legal ground for it because the data organization is a care organization, and the care organization authorizes another care organization to review its data, but those authorizations are really just issued by its vendors, and yeah, in name of the care organization. So yeah, I think it is a tricky one. Because meaning if the Hutch node of one if one Hutch node of a vendor gets compromised because it's an administrator got bribed or hacked or something, and all of the attacker could issue an authorization credential which works on all other Hutch nodes of the care organization, basically.
But isn't it so currently you already have that you have to manually select to trust another vendor source system node. That's already part of the nuts architecture, I believe. And for organization credentials specifically, the problem is that they're just added by the vendor, not necessarily verified like with the KVK attribute, and that's why this is a sticky problem. Do I understand it correctly that way? Because it's trust-based currently, the organization at a node.
Well, as I say, that's a different kind of trust. The trust you register at the moment is to is like a substitute indeed for the KVK credential. But I said it's more about, hey, when you have several vendors which all provide a service to a specific care organization, what level of trust is there? And do they like automatically trust each other, or yeah?
Okay, yeah, so to give a really concrete example that I know of, and Valerie probably as well, is, for example, at the left side we have a NANAP and a Geremedica node.
Yep.
And there's already trust between those two, because we also created a direct coupling together. And we know about each other's infrastructure, and there's a long-standing working relationship. So whenever one of the two, I think whenever one of the two would issue authorization credential to a viewer, that the other would accept it. But in the process, it's different, because currently this line is enabled per customer, per care organization. So the care organization, of course, there has been a technical review between the two vendors, and then the care organization says, hey, I want to activate the connection between these two vendors, please do this. And if the customer says, please do this, you have to do it, right? But then the process is known. So, for example, if this would be the first connection made, and the request for the customer, from the care organization, is handled by the vendor, then it's a trigger for the vendor to say, this is something new. Is this safe or not? Who is that other vendor? Can we trust them with issuing authorization? And if you base everything on standards and we automate everything, then the other vendor will probably not even know this is happening. The entire trigger will be gone.
Right.
So that's something new then, I guess.
But I don't think, or I think the system right now where you have to manually trust other nodes before anything can happen, such as this logic, also it works quite well. Also in terms of data minimization and privacy.
Yeah. So, but what if that one is automated as well?
I think then we're talking about something that's like the organization should have some sort of admin panel or where they can specify what source or which of their vendors does what.
Yeah, so I think you're right. So the probably the care organization is going to establish that trust, because what the care organization is doing is saying, oh, this is a vendor of mine and this is a vendor of mine.
Yeah.
I think the only problem there is that care organizations look more at what is functionally possible and are less worried about security. So that might become a thing.
But
one of the other things is the node that is assuming this role for a certain use case. Would that be the most secure vendor or the least secure vendor? Could of course be an add-on, right? So it might be a vendor that's only managing authorizations,
Exactly.
and then all the big parties have to trust the little guy. So that would become interesting then.
Exactly, but then because that's also kind of a question I had. Different actors in the network have different roles. For instance, the example you just gave, where one vendor just does all of the authorizations, and the other ones are more used specifically for viewer and etc. That is information that you would like to have also known to the network, so that also when you try to do something with an organization, you know where to look for a consent or for an authorization, and don't have to broadcast everywhere. But that is something that is actually the responsibility of the organization to say, you have to go here for that and there for that. So again, like if we as nuts can give parameters that a organization can play with and set up or configure, then we leave it with the responsibility of the organization to do that properly.
There's of course also discussion going on in also within the NEN. Do you have to audit the applications themselves? And should there be a governing authority? Well, probably there is, right? So if they're going to audit all the WGIS NEN normen, then there is a governing authority that says if a specific piece of software can do that part of the data exchange. And that gives some sort of trust. I think it's a tricky thing.
Well, but does it have to be enforced at that level, or is that just a contract level between organizations that were?
Yeah, I think legally it's all up to the care organization. It's just that I think that there's a difference in vendors, and maybe one vendor would say, I'm taking my job very seriously and I want to know what's happening. Luckily, they can just proactively monitor whatever is happening, because they can see, of course, if there's a new service provider for a certain care organization.
Yep.
Yeah, but this meeting is all about scoping. So, and I think like we see the sensibility of this in scope, but how the exact like how it should work and how we make it secure. And I think it's out of scope for this meeting.
Yes.
We all agree that this should be in scope.
Yeah, I'm from a Hink's perspective, I think it is quite important to be able to, because like I showed you guys, we use now a verifiable credential for Hink that kind of links to two organization credentials and says, yeah, that's the same one, so that we can apply business logic to that, etc. That's quite messy, and I don't think the current scope that we have defined here includes that organization or organization information in a NUTS network. Also has just information on where to go for what, and the role of multiple vendors in that context of organization.
Yeah, so there's two things in your story, Edwin. I think one is actually solved by this concept, because you're saying, hey, there are two organization credentials and they are the same. But the requirement for this working group is that you can authorize the entire organization. So whatever is needed to get that done.
Yeah, but that kind of assumes that that you want to do the same thing at both sides. But what we have the case is the example you gave. The consent storage is at this node, and the data retrieval has to happen at this node. This node is for the viewer. So where does where does in the nuts network do we store that information?
Yeah, but those are services in the DID documents, right?
I'm sorry, I don't understand that level of.
Yeah. So basically, in the DID document, which is the link between a single vendor and a care organization,
Yeah.
is the entire list of services that that vendor provides for that care organization.
Right, but so if you only know of one organization credential, that doesn't include the logic of that.
No.
PID
So
thing of the
basically,
other
what you're doing in this process, right? So you're going to authorize something. Your search probably starts with an organization name or something, right? So
Yep.
from this concept, you say, I want to authorize that organization. Then at one level lower, you're going to look at those organization credentials that there are currently. Look for all credentials matching my search. Could be 1, could be 10, could be whatever. The next step would be, for which use case am I authorizing? So if you find 10 matching organization credentials,
yep,
10 different DIDs, the next step would be look in those DID documents and say, okay, this is the service I want to authorize for. Those other 9 do not list that service. So I don't care about those.
So you get a bit of an aggregate view of all of the organization credentials that you find and the services that are then.
Yeah, so you can.
They add to a single.
There's an API that does both in a single search. Right, there's a single API that says I want to look for this care organization name and this service type.
Okay, and does it also work the other way around when you're in a viewer and you want to view data, you're searching for an organization, and then that organization is of course found at multiple vendors. How do you know which vendor will be which organization you need to query to get the authorization credential, and which one do you need to get for the endpoint of the data, and these type of
information? Yeah. Okay. So there's one thing. There's a current situation and there's one design situation. So basically, your requirement would be, I don't really care which node handles this request, as long as it's one that can handle this request, because it's more about authorization request, right? Even if there are nodes that have multiple nodes that can do it for you, I don't care. I just want to find any that's applicable and take the first one. Yeah. So that's a requirement.
Yeah.
You don't want to be annoyed by having to choose a specific nuts node within your software to do what you want to do.
Yeah. Exactly.
That's what this scoping is about. That's about I don't care which node handles what, as long as it's deterministic and it works.
Okay, and does it also include the kind of a checking state where you don't know which node handles what, and you can check that? Like if an organization is known at 10 nodes, but 9 of them are viewers, and only one of them is the data storage. Is there a way to check that with this, or would you just always have to?
Yeah, so that's in the DID document. You can see this based on the services that are offered by a specific vendor for that care organization.
Okay.
So we could create even a more specific version of this one that says something like this. God. Send to back order. Right. So this is a use case.
Yep.
And maybe this is another one.
Yep.
You know this. This is advertised by each node. Could also be the case that this one is overlapping.
Okay. Yeah, they do both.
Could be the case.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying.
Yep. So that's the thing on use cases. Okay. Given the time, I think there's a pretty clear view on what is needed. You guys have a feeling that it will support your requirements. Are you missing anything? Basically the question.
No, I just asked my question, so I think this aligns.
Okay. Next step would be, because I made some comments in the bottom of the slides, I'm going to put this in here in the requirements part and share this on Slack. And this video will also be shared via YouTube and then a comment on Slack. And hopefully I'm able to put it in bullets, and then everybody can review and see if we have a correct understanding of all the requirements.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Yeah, because this is text, we might have to put one or two examples in there for certain use cases to clarify further.
Yeah, I would gladly help by that if you want some input on examples.
Okay, so and when this is done, the next step would be designing all this, which is pretty tough, I think. Yeah, so there will be a next meeting organized for that. Will probably be on location.
Or maybe also breaking it down into multiple versions and scopes, right? So we don't need to do the full thing in the first. So like maybe the next step, once we have the scope, we break it down, right?
But we might be able to break it down, but we have to regard like multiple nodes can make use of it. It's accepted by multiple nodes. This one might be something we can postpone a bit. But this one, I think we can't postpone. And this is probably one of the hardest, and also it solves this one. Because you can't skip you're no longer allowed to access something. That's something you can't skip in the first version. Jorrit?
Yeah, it's probably too early, but I was thinking that you are going to design this after you wrote down all the requirements. Probably we will need another type of authorization credential, right? That is not on DoD level, but on the trusted identifier of an organization level or something.
Yeah, so not to get ahead of the design, but of course you could say the credential is issued not to a DID, but to a logic identifier.
Mm-hmm.
And when you request an access token, you're not just sending your authorization credential, you're sending your authorization credential and organization credential. So you prove ownership of the logic identifier,
Mm-hmm.
and you're authorized to access. Then you have
Okay.
to set
Yeah.
2 credentials. So
And then
that would be basically an idea how to use it in the request access token flow. But that only solves this part, right? So it still has to be sent or requested from those specific nodes that should have access to the authorization credential.
But
So
if
that's
you do it like that, it would be sort of like backwards compatible with the current situation. So people could still keep on authorizing entities on nuts node level, but they can also do it if they want on organization level.
Yeah. The only challenge is the part in the access policy where you're going to check something. You're going to have logic that says, okay, it might be an authorization credential directly issued to a certain DID, but it might also be one in combination with an organization credential, and then you have to match them on logical identifier and the other one on the DID. It could also be a consent directly issued by the patient in combination with an organization credential. So the number of combinations will become larger. Of course, we can hard code stuff, but we're also going to look at how to make it easier to support any combination of credentials from the future.
Okay, nice. And is it something? I know that René Heatkamp is building his own little issuer of LSDR credentials.
Oh, that's nice. Who's wie is de opdrachtgever? Who's who?
Yeah, it's at the Zorginstituut because Zorginstituut needs it for the KICV use case, but they cannot wait, and LSDR is too slow. So René is planning to do it for himself, at least for.
Oh, he's still planning to do it, because I know he was planning to do it. If he started,
he says he's going to do it, but he needs to like actually build like a little organization, right, with some FTEs and stuff.
Yeah, so it's basically it's almost super simple. You need to have some kind of web environment, and then somebody from the board of directors logs into the own application, so the electronic patient record or whatever, then says, I want to authorize this piece of software. You jump to the Zorginstituut application, you log in with e-herkenning or something more fancy. Then you say, yes, that other party is now authorized to receive information about this party. And then the Zorginstituut sends back a verifiable credential to the wallet of the node that started to redirect. And then you have a credential. And the issuer is the Zorginstituut. So that's the basic flow. It's not that difficult, but you have to take responsibility for everything.
Yeah. Maybe it's good to put some to stimulate René to keep on moving and stop talking and doing stuff. Yeah. Okay.
Would this be on top of the value that the KVK attribute brings? What does the LRZA do in this case that the KVK doesn't help with?
It's a little additional tag that it's a healthcare organization.
Yeah. Okay.
So if you have a healthcare organization that committed fraud, you're still an organization, but you're no longer a healthcare organization.
Okay, got it.
And of course, the KVK database is a mess because
it is.
I think there's a SBVE code, I think, about, or there's I don't know how these codes are called. There's a code for hospitals, but there are no hospitals in that category, and all hospitals have a different code. So
Yeah, yeah, it's not trustworthy. But we only need it as an identifier to link two or more nuts nodes. So in
yeah,
that
so
case,
there's also a link. There's a link in the W3C DID specification on this. It says, oh no, in the verifiable credential specification, it says that any credential subject, if you put a URI in there, it should be resolvable. So for example, if you put an identifier based on a web address in there, you should be able to go to that web address and see information about that specific subject.
Oh, cool.
But it's a shoot. But it's a pretty cool shoot, right? So if you see something like there that says cbg.nl or .gov, I don't know, whatever they're using, / URA / and then a number, then you could just go directly to your browser, fill it in, and see what organization it is. That should be really cool. It would be correctly implemented. Or the same with the Zorg Institute. So if the Zorg Institute is providing that service, then you should be able to go to zinl.nl / organization / whatever. And that should be the same as your credential subject.
So it doesn't have to be a DID
No,
per se. Okay.
it can be a URI, and
Yeah.
almost everything is a URI. They only added a small note that it should be resolvable and then human readable.
Mm.
But it's a should, it's not a must. So, but
Okay.
but it adds value.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
Yes. So that's I think enough for now. And we'll see if we can get a list of requirements out in Slack soon.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thanks.
Thanks a
all
lot.
for attending. And
See you.
next time.
Good afternoon, guys.
Yeah.
Bye.
See you. Have a nice day. Bye bye.